want to thank our sponsor, Aviator, who have created a collection of limited edition watches to celebrate the 80th anniversary of VE Day in the form of the P51 Mustang Patriot Automatic, the Spitfire Type 300 Automatic, and the Hawker Hunter Kent Automatic, each coming in 2 different colourways. The detail on the watch is incredible, as it shows Winston Churchill's universally recognised V sign for victory on both the face and the caseback, plus engraved on the caseback is Churchill's stirring words from his speech on VE Day, and as an added bonus on the leather band it shows the musical notes of Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 that are subtly engraved, which is often called the Victory Symphony. I personally own the Valor Midnight, as I love the large V sign on the dial that acts as a second hand, and the lume really shows off the detail in this watch. Either way, you won't be disappointed with any of the models you decide to go for, which you can pick up now via their website at avi-8.com. Thank you and enjoy. So Rick, can you talk us about your journey, how you got to fly the Lightning?
I certainly can, my dream aircraft. It really goes back to before I even joined the RAF. And I was in South Africa, where I'd been at school at university, and I, wanted to go flying, and I saw this brochure for the Royal Air Force. It said, "Join the Royal Air Force, and the world is your oyster." And on the front page, on the cover, was a photograph of a squadron of Lightnings, the 74 Squadron, in fact, and the pilots were walking back from their flight. And I looked at that and I just pointed at it and I said, "That is me." So from that moment onwards, I was single-mindedly, absolutely determined to become a Lightning pilot. Right. And that was before I even joined the RAF, although I was wanting to join. But I honestly didn't think I could from South Africa. But one night my father said to me, he said, Rick, have you thought about joining the RAF to become a pilot? And I said, well, I have, Dad, but I don't think I'm eligible because I'm here in South Africa. And he'd obviously done a bit of research, and he said, well, you are. So that was it. That changed my life, those few words. Next day I applied and I did my...
the next day?
The very next day I applied, yeah. I did my medical test with the South African Air Force. I did my aptitude tests at the university in Johannesburg, and I did my interviews with the British Defence Liaison Staff in Pretoria. And they came through and said, well, congratulations, Rick, we've accepted you for pilot training. When would you like to sail? I thought, sounds pretty good. Need a bit of a holiday, so 6 weeks' time, and I sailed from Cape Town to Southampton, 2 weeks on board ship, Union Castle, Cape Town Castle. Fantastic holiday that was, I might add, and Her Majesty's government paid for me to come. And the second thing, they said, what would you like to drink? And I said, well, this augurs well for the future, I thought to myself. So it was a perfect start to me for what quite frankly turned out in my eyes to be a perfect career. So I then did my officer training and then into flying training. I did my basic flying at Acklington on the Jet Provost, so I sailed straight through Jetman. And then I went to do my advanced flying on the NAT at RAF Valley. Got the flying prize there, and I still focused on becoming a Lightning pilot. Well, I got what I wanted, so I was posted to Lightnings. And then I went off to Chivenor in Devon to do my sort of tactical weapons training, pre-Lightning course training on the Hunter. And then I went to Caldershall, where the Lightning OCU was at the time, Lightning Operational Conversion Unit, and lovely place that was. And there started my time on the Lightning.
Did you ever feel at one point that it wasn't going to happen, and did you have a plan B if you weren't going to go to the Lightning?
No, I didn't have a plan B. As far as I was concerned, my father had been a Battle of Britain pilot, and he was a fighter pilot, and I wanted to be, and I was single-mindedly, I wanted to be a second-generation fighter pilot. Interesting though, when I did my basic flying training, at the end of the course, the powers of the B said to me, Rick, we'd quite like you to go to helicopters. Because we're looking for people with good leadership potential to go to what was a fairly new force then, And of course, they spent a lot of time out in the field. They needed good leadership. So I said, well, I want to be a fighter pilot. So they said, well, go away and think about it, and let us know in a week's time. The week later, they came to me and they said, we still think we'd like you to go to helicopters. I said, well, I still think I'd like to be a fighter pilot, but I came top of the course and sort of and basically sort of got what I wanted, and never looked back. But it was never a given. I did take to flying quite well, but I worked very hard. I was absolutely determined, and I really did work hard. And if I think back at it, and I've always said that the amount of effort I put in paid rich dividends, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk us through some of your ground training on the Lightning, because it seems like a bit of a complex aircraft?
I mean, when I got to Coltishall, and the first thing, I stood next to the Lightning for the first time, and I thought, wow, this is a big aircraft. It weighs about 20 tons, and it is a big aircraft. By that stage, of course, I'd been going through flying training, and we'd done a lot of studying of all the aerodynamics and technical matters, engines, and you name it. We'd studied things in depth during our training, because that took 2.5 years I was at by this stage before I flew the Lightning. And then the Lightning, we did a month's ground school, if I recall, right at the start. We studied all the technical aspects of the Lightning. It's an aircraft. It was a complex aircraft. Obviously, everything was much bigger, and it was an interesting aircraft, but it wasn't over complex in my view.
Oh, really? Okay.
And but there was plenty of complexities in it, and it was a challenge, no doubt about that. But the ground school's ground school. It's always been the ground school. It's what happens in the air that really interests me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get onto that. So can you talk us through your flying training on the Lightning?
Flying training, well, the very first thing when we got there, we had our. In fact, I should go back before. Having done all the lead-in training, we spent a week at RAF North Luffenham, which was the Aviation Medicine Centre, where we had to sort of go through, learn all about the sort of things we needed to know for flying the Lightning, because the Lightning could go pretty fast and could go pretty high.
Yeah.
And so we really had to understand the effect of high altitude in particular, because we had to learn how to what we call pressure breathe for that very high level sorties.
Oh, really?
If we had a depressurization or something like that,
Right.
we had to understand, because it was fairly critical if you're very high and you have a depressurization.
Right.
We wore pressure jerkins, in fact.
Ah.
On that week we did decompression training, we did hypoxia training. We were very well versed. I found aviation medicine a fascinating subject, actually.
Right.
We were very well, and for flying an aircraft like the Lightning, you had to really understand, in particular, the effects of high altitude, and which is very different up there from down at low level.
Yeah.
Not much air up there.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say that the very first sortie, to whet our appetite, we had an initial sortie where we flew with our instructor, and it was just a sort of a familiarization trip. Well, all I'll say is, having climbed in the Lightning, and the Lightning is just a fantastic. It was a fantastic aircraft from the very first flight, and it was a fantastic aircraft for me until the very last flight, which came 1,500 hours later and nearly 7 years later. I just absolutely loved flying the Lightning. It was a manned rocket, quite frankly. It was a small cockpit with two great thundering engines behind us, and boy, those engines were powerful.
Yeah.
But so that first sortie, we saw all the power of the aircraft. We went supersonic, and it just whetted the appetite. And then we did ground school and simulator training. Did a lot of simulator training, because one thing about the Lightning, it moves so fast. It's basically a single seat aircraft, although we did have two-seaters to do our conversion on. When you have an emergency, things happen fast. So in the simulator, one of the things we really had to know our flight reference cards backwards, so we had to know our checks backwards, and we had to know how to deal with emergencies as well. So the simulator rides were, there was no visuals or anything like that. You know, it was you were on, you climb in the simulator and you were on instruments from the start, which is no bad thing for the Lightning, because plenty of our flying was done at night, and you really got to know the emergencies. And that was the story of, you know, throughout my time on the Lightning, every month we had to go through really an emergencies simulation ride, and you got tested all the time. You kept your you were sharp. You were sharp. Because you simply had to react quickly. And you know, if I look back at the Lightning now, I found the Lightning quite easy to fly, quite frankly. Oh, okay. But flying it has never, in my experience, because in my second tour I came back to Caldershall as an instructor. And where I found people sort of had problems was not actually flying the aircraft, it was keeping up with the speed of the aircraft. Right. You know, it was dealing with. It was the sheer mental capacity, and you know, once you got behind the aircraft, you had a problem.
Yeah. And did you, on that first trip, did you do? I guess it's called like a performance takeoff now, like the reheats and going vertical.
As I recall, I think we'd reheat. We got shown it was a reheat takeoff. It was enough to impress me, more than impress me. Quite frankly, it was brilliant. I had a lovely instructor who became a personal friend, a chap called Jerry Crumby, and he'd been the display pilot on 74 Squadron. Really lovely man. Unfortunately, he died quite young, but he was a personal friend as well. And I did, I think it was 4 dual trips before going solo.
And what was that like, that solo trip?
Well, a dream come true. A dream come true. I mean, I really did. I took to the Lightning very quickly. I just felt totally at home in it right from day one, and I never had any problems flying the Lightning. And I went solo on time, and it was just fantastic. You know,
absolutely.
That you're flying. I was 22 years old at this stage, and there were people younger than me. But
wow.
It was, you know, there I was, 22. I'd worked hard. I was highly trained even by that stage, and it was just a sheer thrill. It was a great thrill, yeah. Then I went through the rest of training, and the training was divided into 3 phases. We had the conversion phase, where we sort of did our conversion and instrument flying and everything else, sort of, and high level flying and things like that. And then when we finished that, we had a basic test, passed that, and then went on. Then we moved on to the weapons phase, and there were two sides to that. There was the basic weapons training, which was mainly, you know, it was on the radar, intercept training, and I've always had one of my fortes has always been sort of, I've got a fairly mathematical brain, and I really felt that paid rich dividends, sort of flying an aircraft like the Lightning, because you've got to mentally do a lot of calculating of things when you're working the radar.
Think on your feet, don't you? Yeah.
You've got to think fast, and that's really the key to flying the Lightning. You had to think fast. You had to stay in front of the aircraft, and you were okay. Mm-hmm. But when you're doing intercepts, you're flying around at just below the speed of sound against targets that are probably doing about the same, so the closing rate is pretty quick. Yep. The Lightning's radar was not the best in the world, to be quite frank.
I've heard that before.
So you wouldn't get fantastic range pickups, say pick up the target at 20, 25 miles. Yeah. You haven't got much time to sort of calculate what his heading is, what he's doing, what height he's at, and then plan your intercept. We did have procedures. We knew what we were going to do. We had keys to sort of aim for. So, you know, as long as we'd done our homework, we knew what we were dealing with. But you still had to work fast and calculate fast. And so that was the basic phase. You're learning basically how to use the weapon system as such. That's the radar and the gun sight and the missiles and guns as well. And then when we finished that, I remember correctly, Then it was going to be, because I did my initial flying on the Lightning T4 and the Mark 1A.
Wow. Okay.
And then at the end of those two phases, a decision was made as to where we were going to go. And basically they selected people to go to Germany. Because the Germany squadrons had Mark II Lightnings, which were very similar to the 1A. Mm-hmm. Or if they weren't going to go to Germany, they'd go down to another squadron, which had the Mark III Lightning and the T5 Lightning, which was basically sort of feeding the other squadrons, the UK squadrons, and the squadron in Cyprus and Singapore.
Wow.
Well, I was selected for Germany. So I stayed where I was, basically, on the Mark 1A. And then we did the advanced weapons training, which included all the supersonic intercepts and the high flying intercepts and the more complex scenarios.
Yeah. So you got on, so your first frontline squadron, was it 92, I think?
92.
Yeah, so talk us through that, Rick. What was it like being on a frontline squadron for the first time?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I went to Germany. 3 of us were posted to Germany. In fact, 2 on to 19, and which was our sister squadron in Germany.
Yeah.
And I went to 92, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the best squadron around. I mean, your first squadron is always the most special one.
Yeah.
But 92 had a fantastic history, and is still a very special squadron. And even today I'm president of the 92 Squadron Association, so I still have a very close connection with 92 Squadron.
Yeah.
Very close to my heart. I loved it, absolutely loved it. I mean, to be quite frank, when I got to Germany, it was RAF Gütersloh, which was the closest base to the other side in the Cold War, as it were. We had 2 squadrons of Lightnings there, 2 squadrons of Hunters, fighter reconnaissance Hunters, a helicopter squadron. We had an RAF regiment squadron, missiles, as I recall. It was quite a base, but we were sort of, we knew we were in the Cold War. It was very real.
You could feel that atmosphere when you were there.
Oh yeah, but of course I got there. Now I was on my first squadron. There I was. I had just had my 23rd birthday when I joined 92, and to be quite frank, I was in awe of the pilots on the squadron, because they were all combat ready, seasoned Lightning pilots. Mm-hmm. And I just felt so proud to be sort of in the company of, as far as I was concerned, they were all great fighter pilots.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed my time on 92 right from day one. I had a mentor there for my early days, and he's still a very good friend to this day. A chap called Doug Aylward, who was one of the very first tour Lightning pilots onto the Lightning.
Wow.
Yeah, and he stayed on Lightnings for a long time. So we had a lot of fun. There were a lot of bachelors on the squadron, because the squadrons if we had 12 aircraft, shall we say, that was a squadron really, and we had about 15 pilots. So we were a real band of brothers. You socialised together, you worked together, you did everything together, and you really got to know each other, and you trusted each other because of the flying you were doing. A lot of the flying, we were in formation, close formation, battle formation. We were working with each other all the time. You had to trust each other and know their capabilities. And we had just a brilliant squadron with a brilliant bunch of people, and they're all, those that are still alive, they're all still my close friends today. That's how close it was. Yeah. I would call it, we were a real band of brothers, and that's what we were. There were a lot of bachelors in there, because Lightning squadrons by this stage had probably a half to 2/3 of the squadron were first tour Lightning pilots. So we were okay. a bunch of young
lads.
I say ripshits. we were a spirited bunch. Let's put it that
absolutely.
Way. Yeah.
So on 92, when you were in Germany, were you just sitting queue, or were you actually doing some training?
Oh, we were doing a lot. No, we were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot of training. We had. We were doing a lot Each squadron, we would, 24-hour all-weather sort of pilots basically. So the squadrons were divided into 2 flights, and one flight would be flying days 1 week, and then nights the next week.
Right.
And so you always had only one flight in at a time for training purposes. I mean, when you had exercise, we used to have a lot of exercise. Then the whole squadron was in. So we did a lot of training flying. And of course, I got there. I wasn't combat ready or anything. I had to do my own sort of combat ready workup.
Okay, right.
You work up. You go through a syllabus to get yourself combat ready in the environment, because it's a new environment. There's a lot to learn again, and you get yourself up to what they call limited combat ready. When you get limited combat ready, we could then sit on QRA.
Yeah, Q, yeah.
Which was known as battle flight out there.
Oh, was it?
I'll
Okay.
talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah.
And then but that wasn't the end of our workup. We then continued the workup, and then we'd get fully combat ready. And fully combat ready, we were then, we included having the sort of right instrument rating qualification, because there was a lot of bad weather we were flying in out there, particularly in winter. Yeah, remember that. By the time you get to combat ready, you were cleared to take part in not just battle flight, but all the relevant exercises and things like that.
Right.
If I talk about battle flight, we had in Germany we had 2 aircraft at 5 minutes readiness, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
Wow.
While I was there at different times, there was a time when 92 Squadron would hold battle flight for a period, and then 19 Squadron. There was a time when we both had a pilot, so we shared the sort of.
Okay, right.
That didn't last long, but it was best to have one squadron looking after it. So I spent a fair bit of time on battle flight. We all did. But a lot happened on battle flight. We used to get scrambled a lot.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Did you ever meet some Russians?
We got scrambled a lot. On the other side was the opposition was just across the border, and they were equipped with MiG-21s.
Yes.
So, as I say, we were very close to the border. We were the GCI sites, ground controlled interception sites, where they were monitoring at all times. Monitoring what's going on, and we'd sometimes be in the middle of the night. It could happen any time of the day and night. No notice, brought to cockpit readiness, or scrambled straight. You could get scrambled straight from the crew room.
And would you just be like in your flight suit ready to go? Or
Oh yeah, we were in our flying suits all the time.
Yeah.
We slept in our flying suit. And
Yeah,
you never really slept. You dozed because you did get scrambled at night, and we
Yeah.
had to be airborne in less than 5 minutes. If we weren't airborne in 5 minutes, big questions were asked.
Really?
Oh yeah, we were normally airborne within probably 4 minutes of getting the
Right.
scramble bell,
to be
the
on it.
hooter, and then you got to run to the aircraft. We had the aircraft sort of primed.
Mm-hmm.
The only things we didn't have, we had put the fuel switches on. That's all we had to do.
Right.
Press the button, and the engines roar into life, and off we go. But obviously, you had to strap in.
Yeah.
So, but we were sort of practiced at it. So, and what would happen quite often was the other side would test our reactions. For example, they would launch their aircraft towards the border. We'd be scrambled because they'd see the aircraft approaching the border. We'd be scrambled, and in fact, there was a little kink in the border. Sometimes they'd even come across the border, just only for a couple of seconds. They'd be back in the other side. But we'd be scrambled. They'd see how quickly we got up there, but they were on the other side and they hadn't come across. And you'd often end up in that situation with us going up and down our side of the border, and the MiG-21s going up and down their side of the border.
Right.
So that's the sort of thing that could happen. But to be quite frank, most of our scrambles were for light aircraft.
Oh, were they really?
Light aircraft that
had
strayed into, because next to the border, we had an area there called the Air Defence Identification Zone, ADIZ. And next to that, we had another 10-mile sort of area, which was a buffer zone, called the buffer zone.
Right.
And you didn't go into the buffer zone.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't go into the buffer zone. You certainly didn't go into the ADIZ. And if an aircraft strayed across the other side, they wouldn't be treated lightly.
Yes.
You know.
Of course.
And you get these light aircraft. These people sort of would get lost and just get in the wrong bit of sky. And more often than not, we'd be scrambled to sort of intercept these. Now, they're mainly light aircraft with a top speed of 100, 120 knots, should we say. The Lightning doesn't take too kindly to going much below 180 knots.
Right.
So, but all I can say is, you know, we'd intercept these light aircraft, and you couldn't formate on it because you had an overtake. We'd come past on the right-hand side. But believe me, sort of when a light aircraft sees a very big and fully armed Lightning going past it,
you're going to get a shock.
They get the message.
Yeah.
And you know we've got I'll come to the radios in a minute, and we get their numbers, and they're going to be in trouble. So you could keep them away from the border, but they shouldn't get there in the first place. But they did. We used to fly around in Germany with listening out on the emergency frequency all the time. All aircraft had to be listening out on the emergency frequency because aircraft did stray into the buffer zone. And if you heard the call coming out on the emergency frequency, brass monkey, brass monkey, brass monkey, that was an indication that somebody was in the buffer zone. And that was also the signal to all aircraft, turn onto a westerly heading and check your position.
Wow.
And that's what used to happen, you know.
Yeah.
Because you're operating in an area where you're very close to the other side. And the last thing you want to do is stray into the other side. Yeah. So it's a pretty real environment, very real environment.
And did you like, just to interrupt you there, Rick, did you ever feel like it was going to go hot, as it were?
Well, I can remember one time, when I say we always, this was Cold War, we never knew when something might or might not happen. So the Cold War in my eyes was very real because we knew what the threat was, we trained for the threat, we were ready for the threat, but we just didn't know if and when it was going to happen, because one thing you could be sure, it was going to be a surprise. So we had to be ready, and we were. And we used to do a lot of exercises, day and night. Plenty of stories around those too. But the one time I remember was when Russia invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, this was. And if you think, you probably don't even remember, but Germany was divided into two. There was East and West Germany, and East Germany was on the Russian side. And Berlin was in the middle of East Germany, and the only connection with Berlin was down air corridors.
Right.
There were 3 air corridors, and that's how people got in and out of Berlin. Now, when Russia invaded on this occasion, and we used to train for the contingency I'm about to tell you. When Russia invaded Czechoslovakia, they closed the corridors because in Berlin, Russia and Britain and America and France, I think it was, were all part of, they were all had responsibilities relating to Berlin. And anyway, Russia closed the corridors. So that was the key. We literally had the whole squadron fully armed and on a high state of readiness. And in that situation, I can tell you now, because it doesn't exist anymore, but our plan was, and we used to train for it, was to send a transport probe down the corridor with a fighter escort.
Okay, right.
And in that situation, you didn't know what was going to happen. You know, it might be the start of World War III, quite frankly, or you might get down there. So that's what we were just about to do. When I could say, fortunately, because as far as I'm concerned, you know, when you get into military action, it's because the politicians have failed. And on this occasion, the corridors were reopened. So as far as I was concerned, the political side, the diplomat side, had prevented us having to sort of go down the corridor. But we were ready to do it, and we trained to do it. We used to train to do it. We used to have an exercise at a place called Fazberg once a year. And we did that with the Americans and the French.
Okay.
We used to work very closely with the Americans and the French, because I mean, but you might say sort of, well, why not the Germans? The Germans were not allowed near the other side.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because of, you know, it was post-war.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
This was 1968. This was. This is only 23 years after the end of World War II, and Germany sort of was very constrained with what it could and couldn't do. I mean, it's relaxed completely now, but in those days it was they were constrained, and the responsibility for sort of policing the border, shall we say, was the job of America, France, and the UK.